Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Map Talk webinar with an update on the economy. My name is George Hammond. I'm director of the Economic and Business Research Center. And we are joined here this morning by Jennifer Pullen. She's a senior research economist in the center and the Map Dashboard coordinator. So a few webinar details to get out of the way. The Map Talk will be recorded, and we will have that recording posted later today or tomorrow at the latest. And we will also post a PDF of all of the slides that we're going to talk about this morning. Now, the webinar is going to be conducted in conference mode, and that means that everybody is going to be muted, except for me, of course. And finally, if you want to ask a question, please use the Zoom chat function, or you can always send me an email anytime to ghammond@arizona.edu. Now, first off, I want to thank the partners and sponsors of the Map Dashboard project. Our partners are the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, the PIMA Association of Governments, the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, Sun Corridor, and of course the University of Arizona. I also want to thank our sustaining sponsors, which are the Freeport-McMoran Foundation, Tucson Electric Power, and the Thomas R. Brown Family Foundations. Also be sure to check out the Map Dashboard features. Now these happen once a month. You'll find a Map Dashboard feature in the on the front page of the business section of the Arizona Daily Star, and you'll find on the first Monday of the month a Map Dashboard feature in the health section. So be sure and check out the Map Dashboard in the Arizona Daily Star. Now, in addition to the regular core data offerings on the dashboard, we also do a large number of feature articles, and these really cover a range of topics. Some of them are done by the staff in the Economic and Business Research Center, and some are done by U of A faculty through the Dashboard's white paper grant program. So you find many of these are on housing topics lately, so we have a nice portfolio of analysis on that issue. You'll also find the latest feature article, which deals with agriculture in Southern Arizona. And of course, these days we're doing a lot of analysis on the economic impacts of the COVID outbreak. Now, we also want to make sure that you engage with us. So you can do that by signing up for our monthly newsletter. That's the best way to keep up to date with what's going on in the dashboard. And we've also added a new feature to the dashboard, and that is the high frequency data. So this will help you keep up with the weekly and sometimes daily data that we're tracking these days. So be sure and click on that link often, and that will get you to that most recent data, some of which we'll take a look at later this morning. Okay, well, let's jump in and talk about the key topics today. First thing that you want to keep in mind when you're thinking about the future, and in particular when you're looking at forecasts for what may happen going forward, including my forecasts, is that uncertainty is really dominating the outlook. There's just a lot that we don't know at this point about how the virus works and exactly how it's transmitted, although we're learning more each week. But we don't know for sure how the outbreak is going to progress from here on out. We are certainly seeing a surge in the outbreak here in Arizona at the moment, and that's going to have impacts on the outlook. But you want to keep in mind that we don't know exactly what's going to happen with the outbreak going forward, and that means there's a lot of uncertainty about how the economy is going to perform going forward. So we know that we're in the midst of a big downturn, but we're not sure how long that downturn is going to last. And we don't know what the shape or kind of length of the recovery will be, in terms of how long it will take us to get back to our pre-outbreak level of economic activity. So when you're thinking about the future, just keep in mind that there's a lot of uncertainty about the future, more uncertainty than usual. And when you're looking at forecasts, including looking at forecasts that I produce, you want to keep in mind that there are large error bands around those projections. And one of the ways that we deal with that is by thinking about alternative scenarios. So I'll show you at the end some alternative scenarios that'll give you at least a bit of a feel for some alternative outcomes that we may be dealing with. Okay. So one thing that we do know is that the Arizona economy was strong before the outbreak hit. And, this seems like a million years ago now, but, Arizona was adding jobs at double the national pace. In 2019, Phoenix was adding jobs at an even faster rate. Tucson saw strong job growth last year that was faster than the national average. And that was also the fastest job growth that we had seen here in Tucson since before the Great Recession hit, or that 2008-2009 downturn. So we know that Arizona is in the midst of a major downturn. We're seeing, huge job losses. We've seen big declines across really all sectors. We've seen big drops in retail sales activity and a number of other indicators. Now, the travel and tourism sectors were hit first and hit the hardest, as we'll see in a moment. But the ripple effects from that shock of the outbreak and the stay-at-home orders is now rippling across most other sectors. So we have seen a strong response from the federal monetary and fiscal authorities in terms of interest rate policy and the CARES Act. But even with that strong policy response, it's not going to be enough to eliminate the downturn. It's going to help cushion it, but it won't be enough to entirely make the downturn go away. Now, the outlook, as we'll see, calls for a gradual return to growth, but you want to keep two things in mind. Number one, the progress of the outbreak is going to drive the speed of the recovery. If the outbreak continues to intensify here in Arizona, that's going to lead to a slower recovery than even we're expecting under the baseline. And if things get bad enough, could turn out to be worse than even under the pessimistic scenario. I also want to keep in mind that the initial shock was huge, and it is going to take us time to get back to our pre-outbreak levels of economic activity, even under the optimistic scenario. So let's talk a little bit about this huge shock that the economy has suffered. One of the first areas where we saw that was in the weekly data on initial claims for unemployment insurance. And as you can see on this particular figure, in early April, the initial claims for regular unemployment insurance peaked at just over 130,000. Since then, the claims have come back down into the kind of the 20 to 30,000 per week range. Now, the regular unemployment insurance benefits have been augmented by the CARES Act to include what's known as pandemic unemployment assistance. And the CARES Act expanded unemployment compensation in a couple of ways. First, it expanded the coverage of unemployment insurance to include groups that were not covered during prior downturns or prior to the CARES Act. And those two main groups there were contract employees, so there think of gig employees, and then the other major group is the self-employed. Now, the CARES Act also makes some compensation available to individuals who've been affected by the outbreak in one way or another. Perhaps an individual has contracted COVID or is caring for somebody who has contracted it. The CARES Act also greatly expanded the weekly benefits. Now, prior to the CARES Act, the maximum benefit that was available in Arizona was $240 per week. And the CARES Act expanded that by $600 per week. So for a total of $840 each week. That's a big number. That's a significant expansion of the benefit. And there's no doubt that that will increase the disincentive for individuals to go back to work. But you want to keep in mind that while that disincentive is there and has been increased by the expansion of the benefits to cover alternative groups and by just the expansion of the monetary benefit, that there are still strong incentives for individuals to go back to work. First of all, the expansion of the monetary benefits is limited. That $600 increment will end at the end of July. In addition, individuals who had health insurance prior to being furloughed or laid off have a strong incentive to go back to work to reclaim those health insurance benefits. So there are strong incentives for individuals to return to work. Another important incentive to return to work is the fact that if an individual has been furloughed and their employer recalls them, that employer can, if the individual does not return to work once they've been recalled, the employer can report that individual to the Department of Employment Security, and then they would lose the benefits. So there are strong disincentives built into the expanded unemployment insurance compensation system, but there are also strong incentives for individuals to return to work. So overall, we've experienced a significant shock in the economy, and that certainly is in the unemployment insurance data. You also want to keep in mind that these expanded benefits represent a significant infusion of income into the economy. Now, the total benefits paid to date total $4.2 billion. And just to give you a kind of a sense of the scale of that, that's in the neighborhood of 1% of Arizona's total personal income last year. Now, that expanded income is contributing to individuals' ability to pay rent, to buy groceries, and to buy other things, including goods that are taxable under our system here in Arizona. And that's helped boost, no doubt, our overall tax revenues, sales tax revenues here in Arizona. In addition, these unemployment insurance benefits are subject to income tax, and that's also likely contributed to the better than expected performance in income tax withholding, and it will boost our tax revenues as we go forward. So keep that in mind as you think about the impacts of these expanded unemployment benefits. So we also have data now for both Arizona and for the US in terms of the standard employment situation report that we get each month from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And in terms of the unemployment rate, we saw this huge surge in the unemployment rate both nationally and in Arizona in April. The rates both for the US and for Arizona have come down in May as the economy has begun to open back up. Arizona's seasonally adjusted rate was 8.9% in May compared to still a bit below the national rate of 13.3% for the month. So, you know, the national rate remains higher than anything we've seen going back to the late 1940s. The national rate is still as high as anything we've seen since the Great Depression during that 1929 to 1933 period. For Arizona, the rate is now back to some of the high levels that we saw during the 2008-2009 downturn. You do want to keep in mind that there are some classification issues that have arisen. BLS would prefer that individuals who are classified, the individuals who have been laid off are classified as unemployed. The same goes for individuals who have been furloughed. But BLS is recognizing that a significant number of individuals who are on furlough are actually being classified as employed but temporarily away from work. And that's a category that BLS would like to see reserved for individuals who are away from work because they're on vacation or because of an illness, not because they've been furloughed. Now, if we take those people who have been classified as employed but temporarily away from work and we classify them as unemployed, that increases the national rate in May by about 3 percentage points. It raises the April rate by about 5 percentage points for the nation and by about 4 percentage points for Arizona. In addition, if we take a look at a much broader definition of the unemployment rate, the so-called U6 rate, which includes individuals who are marginally attached to the labor force and those who are discouraged, you also get a much larger unemployment rate. It's in the neighborhood of 20% for the nation, and certainly Arizona's rate would be much higher than the official rate if we had that data on a monthly basis. So a significant shock to the labor market that persists, even though things have improved a little bit in May as the economy has begun to open up. But the labor market is still suffering significantly. I wanted to show you what's happened with overall jobs, and these are measured in a somewhat different way. The unemployment rate data is measured by a survey of households. The jobs data, as we call it, is measured by a survey of establishments. And this map shows you the percent change in jobs. So this is not an annualized percent change. It's just the simple percent change from February to May for states across the nation. Now, states that are shaded darker experience larger percentage drops during this period than did states that are shaded lighter. So the US average is a drop of 12.8%. The states in the Northeast, by and large, were hit harder initially by the outbreak, and they suffered larger job losses as a result. Same for Michigan, Kentucky, and Nevada. And what's going on out in Nevada is that's a huge part of their economy is based around travel and tourism, and that, of course, is the hardest hit sector, as we'll see in a moment. Arizona so far has fared a little bit better. We're one of the states that wasn't hit quite as hard, and thus we're shaded a bit lighter. So most of the states that are in the lighter shaded category have somewhat smaller shares in the leisure and hospitality sector or the travel and tourism sector, and they were also, at least initially, hit a little bit less hard by the outbreak. So let's take a look at the Arizona time trends for employment measured by the household survey and by the establishment survey. So the household survey, you want to keep in mind the difference there is that it includes the self-employed, which are excluded from the establishment survey. So it's always shows more employed individuals than we see under the establishment survey definition. And you can see the big drop as we go from February to April, and then a little bit of a bounce back in May. On net from February to May, Arizona has lost about 222,000 by the household survey and about 230,000 in the establishment survey, with a percentage drop from February to May of just over 6% for the household survey and almost 8% under the establishment survey. So we did see a little bit of a bounce back in May. That's true, but we still have a long way to go to get back to where we were before the outbreak struck. So let's take a quick look at the distribution of job loss from February to April. So this is the establishment survey data, and you'll see that the biggest job losses by far were in leisure and hospitality. So that includes entertainment and recreation. Gyms would be also in leisure and hospitality. Accommodation, so hotels and motels, and restaurants and bars are in here as well. So we lost about 131,000 jobs, almost 132,000 jobs from February to April. Next biggest job loss was actually a bit of a surprise. That's what happened in education and health services, with about 40,000 jobs lost. Professional and business services also lost a significant number of jobs. Most of those were in the employment services category. Think of those as contract employees, and those are often the first to go during a downturn. Trade, transportation, and utilities, most of those job losses were in retail trade. We saw either stable employment or increases in food and beverage, and some of the retail jobs, which would be at Target and Walmart, they were pretty stable, but many of the other retail sectors saw big job losses. Other services also saw significant job loss. That's where hair and nail salon employment decreases would be. But as you can see over that period, most sectors, really all sectors, lost jobs. Here's what happened in May. We saw a bounce back as the economy reopened. So leisure and hospitality, those job gains were in arts, entertainment, and recreation, mostly gyms. Food, so restaurants and bars saw some pretty significant job gains as they reopened. Accommodation jobs continued to decline. Retail trade bounced back a little bit. Other services, hair and nail salons, that bounced back, as did healthcare, but they didn't get back even close to those pre-outbreak levels. And we saw some job losses, continued to see job losses in professional and business services and government. Those were in the neighborhood of what we'd expect to see based on the normal seasonal pattern. So overall, we have seen a bounce back, but we're not even close to getting back to where we were. This graph shows over the year job growth for May for Arizona's metro areas and the nation. Notice that the biggest job losses over the year were in Flagstaff. That's because leisure and hospitality, which was really affected by the stay-at-home order, is an unusually big part of the economy there in Flagstaff. Arizona's over-the-year job losses are about 5.6%, same for Phoenix and Tucson, all in that same general area. So one of the things that we want to track pretty carefully as we enter the recovery phase is what's going on with consumer spending. And in past times, we've really struggled to come up with data, really high-frequency data on what's going on with consumer spending. Now, there's a group out of Harvard called Opportunity Insights that's tracking some data. You can see the URL there. It's tracktherecovery.org. And they've put together some data from a group called Affinity Solutions that tracks card-based transactions. So these are debit cards and credit cards. All of the data is seasonally adjusted, and it's all expressed relative to early January, so that pre-outbreak period. And what we see for all card-based transactions is that it's down about 10% now in Tucson, a little bit more than that, about 13% in Phoenix compared to where we were in early January. So you can see that we kind of hit bottom there in the heart of the stay-at-home orders. But since then, we've seen a bit of a recovery through about June 10th. So this data is daily, but it comes out with about a 2-week lag. So this data does break out a little bit. They categorize it into restaurants and hotels. And here you can see that the drop is bigger and the recovery's been slower. We're still about 30 to 40% below where we were in early January. It's likely that the damage is bigger in the hotel sector than it is at this point in the restaurant sector, just based on what we're seeing in the employment data. Now, on the Arizona's Economy website, and you can get there through the high frequency data link on the dashboard, we track over the year change in seated diners at restaurants. So this is a pretty narrow slice of the food industry, right? These are places where you're going to be making reservations. But nonetheless, we saw that huge drop off in activity during the stay-at-home orders. And then we've seen a bit of a rebound. Actually, Phoenix and Arizona rebounded faster than the nation. And that's true up until we get to the most recent week, which is the week ending June 20th. And there we see things start to slow down again, and that may reflect the resurgence of the outbreak here in Arizona. Now, hotel occupancy is also important. We don't have weekly data on that for Arizona, but we do have it nationally. For the most recent week, which is the week ended September 13th, it had continued to recover to about 41.7%, up from 20% in about the middle of April. But hotel occupancy rates nationwide are still way below where they should be at this time of year. So the recovery is kind of gradually continuing in this sector. Now, in terms of entertainment and recreation spending, that's where you'd find card-based purchases of movie tickets at gyms and other entertainment activities. And here, it's gradual recovery. We're still, 40 to 50% below where we were in early January. One of the ways that we track that on the Arizona's Economy website at azeconomy.org and also on the dashboard is through U.S. Box office sales. And you can see here that the total U.S. box office sales for the latest week was about $740,000. And that's just it's such a small number relative to where we should be at this time of year, which in box office sales in the hundreds of millions, that the recovery is basically not reflective on the graph. And part of what's driving that is the fact that studios are not releasing movies at the normal pace. Last week, they released 9 movies, and in a normal year, that would be about 120 to 130 movies released each week. So I think that the studios will begin to release more movies as we go forward, again, depending on what happens with the outbreak. And once that happens, we'll see the box office sales start to rise at a faster pace. Now, within transportation, this would reflect, card-based purchases of gasoline, also card-based purchases of, airline tickets. And you can see here that we have seen a bit of a bounce back, but still 50 to 60% below where we were in early January. And it's likely that the airline sector is going to be one of the last to recover, depending on how the airlines can do in terms of convincing us that it's safe to get on an airplane and literally rub elbows with 150 other people. Now, we track this on the dashboard via the traffic or passengers passing through TSA checkpoints. That's been gradually rising as well. We're up to 3.6 million for the latest week that's ending June 20th. But this week last year we had about 18 million people pass through those checkpoints. So as usual, still a long way to go. Now, the kind of consumer spending that's up significantly these days has been grocery spending. And you can see that the grocery spending relative to January was already surging in early March, and then it just explodes with the declaration of the national emergency as we're all kind of panic buying to restock our pantries. Grocery spending is still way up. That reflects the fact that we're just not going to restaurants at the same pace that we were before the outbreak. Now, apparel and general merchandise, this is a big portion of the retail sector or taxable retail sales here in Arizona. And it's recovered significantly. In Tucson, it's down just 9% from where we were in early January, about 20% according to the latest data for Phoenix. I want to keep in mind that in terms of that taxable retail sales category, this stuff is included there by and large, but a big chunk of taxable retail sales here in Arizona is actually purchases of automobiles. And since we don't generally buy automobiles using our credit cards, it doesn't get reflected in this credit card and really card-based transaction data that we have from Opportunity Insights. And finally, healthcare. This was a sector that was hit pretty hard during the stay-at-home orders and the fact that hospitals weren't allowed to do elective surgeries. Dentist offices were only allowed to do emergency things. Most doctors' offices were only seeing patients on an emergency basis, favoring telemedicine. But we have seen a pretty strong rebound in healthcare spending. As expected, Tucson, it's been actually up over that January period for a little bit over the past month, has since settled back down. But we would expect healthcare offices to do a somewhat better job of convincing us that we're safe going back into that environment. So let's talk about the outlook. So the baseline projections, we're looking for huge job, income, and sales declines. Those declines are from peak to trough are going to be pretty similar to what we saw during 2008, 2009 downturn, but it looks like that kind of peak to trough drop is going to be on a monthly basis, that kind of February to April period. And that's about a 10% drop. Now, the unemployment rate peaks well above where we were in 2008, 2009, particularly if we account for the misclassification. Overall, it looks like there's going to be, a modest impact on population, but that should be over pretty soon based on what I think we'll see in the net migration data. And that means that, our Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson are going to remain really popular migration destinations. I don't think we're gonna see a big surge in migration to Arizona, given that we're experiencing a significant acceleration in the outbreak. We're not going to be seen as a safe haven, I don't think, going forward, and that means that we'll probably return to our long run migration levels pretty quickly. Arizona is still going to be seen as a favorable migration destination for all the reasons that we've been seen as a favorable destination over the past 30 or 40 or 50 years. And that means that housing activity is not going to get a big boost from a big migration surge, but we'll return to kind of normal levels of housing activity pretty quickly. Overall, the recovery begins later this year. The current baseline forecast calls for us to get back to pre-outbreak levels in early 2022. I want to keep in mind that the pessimistic scenario at this point is almost as likely as the baseline scenario, and that calls for, as we'll see, a much slower return to pre-outbreak levels of activity. So this particular graph gives you a bit of a sense of how the recovery will work out across industries. So this is the net change in jobs from 2019 till 2022 by industry. So think of 2019 as the pre-outbreak level of activity. Education and healthcare recovers rapidly and gets well above that 2019 level by 2022. Same for retail, trade, professional and business services, and construction. But really, the industries that are slower to rebound are primarily the tourism sectors and leisure and hospitality. Information is a sector that includes newspapers, TV, radio stations, kind of telecommunications. Of that sort, and that's a sector that's been hit hard by declining advertising revenues, and it will take a little bit longer for that sector to rebound. So here's the timing of the recovery across all three scenarios: the optimistic, the baseline, and the pessimistic. If we take the prior peak or that pre-outbreak maximum as happening in the first quarter of 2020. The optimistic scenario gets back there by about the middle of 2021, and I would characterize that as a V-shaped recovery. The baseline has that happening in early 2022, and the pessimistic scenario takes longer to get back to that pre-outbreak level of activity that happens in early 2024, or about 4 years from now. So the key takeaways, uncertainty is really dominating the outlook. And you want to keep in mind that there may be significant changes to the outlook, to my forecast and to other forecasts, as we get new information about the spread of the outbreak and the economic impacts of what we've already seen transpire. I'm working now on a new forecast for June that's likely to be marked up, but I still think it will take us until 2022 to get back to that pre-outbreak level. We'll be back on a regular quarterly forecast schedule, I think, starting in July. So keep in mind the Arizona economy was strong before the outbreak. The state, at least initially, wasn't hit particularly hard, but those conditions are currently worsening significantly. And if we can't get a handle on the outbreak, that's likely to contribute to a slower than expected recovery. So Arizona, there's no doubt we're suffering a major downturn, but growth will return. The travel and tourism sectors are likely to be slower to recover than most other sectors of the state economy. And you want to keep in mind that, the progress of the outbreak is really going to matter here, in part because it's going to affect consumer and worker perceptions. And that is going to matter in terms of how that travel and tourism sector will recover going forward. So the sooner that we have a handle on the outbreak and we see cases declining again, the more likely it is that we'll have a more solid recovery. Now, the federal monetary and fiscal policy relief will help, but it won't eliminate the downturn. It's likely that we will see some more additional fiscal policy relief, at least at some point, but even that won't be enough to eliminate the downturn. It can help to put a floor under the recovery and even to help speed the recovery somewhat, but it can't make everybody whole. So with that, I'll conclude my prepared remarks, and I'm looking at the chat box, and here Jennifer can unmute if she has any additional questions. But let's see the first question. So many believe that the extra $600 CARES benefit was set too high and serves as a disincentive to work. If Congress were to extend, what is the right dollar amount? So yes, the federal government was in a position of choosing one benefit level that would work, given the uncertainty that we were facing in March about where the outbreak would hit the hardest and how long the outbreak would last. So they chose a relatively generous benefit amount. And part of the idea there was to try to get something that would work in the large urban areas where the cost of living is much higher. That $600 makes it a really generous benefit for a relatively low-cost state like Arizona. It still remains to be seen if there will be an extension of that $600 benefit, right? The regular unemployment insurance there's been an extension of the extended benefits through the end of the year. So those individuals, self-employed, the gig workers will be able to claim the regular benefit through the end of the year. But that $600 benefit will go away under current law at the end of July. Now, what's the right benefit level? That's a tougher thing to say. If we could do it all over again, and if we knew for sure that the state unemployment systems could handle a more nuanced approach to this, then we would want to choose something that's closer to the individual's pre-layoff income level. And that's something that was discussed, that we would cap each individual's benefit at something close to what they were making before, or maybe a little bit less. That wasn't done because it was clear that the computer systems that states were using at the time wouldn't be able to handle that sort of nuanced approach. So if in a perfect world, we would cap the benefits at something close to what somebody was making before being laid off. In lieu of that, something that was adjusted to reflect the prevailing wage level in a given industry, or on average across all industries, would be in a state or a local area would be the preferred benefit. So the next question: given the downturn in the hospitality and other sectors, what needs to be done to protect downtown? That really the best thing that we can do at this point to speed the recovery, at least one thing that we can do that would really help, would be to get a handle on the outbreak. The sooner that we get a handle on the outbreak, the more masks they're wearing there is. At this point, seems to be the consensus. The quicker we'll get a handle on the outbreak, and the more quickly people will feel comfortable returning to the kinds of activities that they were doing before all of this began. But, life is going to be different until we have, effective therapeutics or an effective vaccine. And we need to protect the vulnerable populations. So, those age 65 and older and with comorbidities and those groups just may not feel as comfortable going back to those kinds of activities until we do have effective therapeutics and the vaccine. So it is going to be a new world that we're going to adjust to. The things that we want to make sure that we're doing are making consumers feel as comfortable as we can going out and doing those things. And the other side of that coin is making sure that the workforce feels as protected and as comfortable as possible going back into those kinds of environments. So that's an area where, all of us wearing masks can make people feel more comfortable about going back to work in restaurants and other activities. But it's going to be a difficult process in the near term, particularly with the outbreak expanding at the moment. So the next question is, are you aware of racial or economic disparities related to COVID in Arizona? That's not something that we have looked at, or that I have looked at very closely to date, but that is, I think, an excellent suggestion for future articles on the map. So we'll start to break out that data in terms of employment as we move forward. We have done a breakout by sex, so the job data does break out between men and women, and we have seen, I think, some more severe job impacts on women than on men. We do have an article on that particular topic on Arizona's economy. So check out azeconomy.org. Val Rice, a business information specialist here in the center, I believe, wrote an article on that about 6 weeks ago now, which is why I'm having trouble recalling the details there. But if you're interested in that particular breakout, visit Arizona's economy. And we will dig into the race and ethnic differences on the dashboard in the near future. So thanks very much for that question. If there are any questions on your end, Jennifer?
No, George, I don't have any additional questions.
Okay, great. Thanks. Have I missed any questions on the chat?
There was one question which you partially covered already on, will it be possible to get a handle on the outbreak without needing more isolation and sheltering? You've partially covered that in your response a moment ago. Okay.
Yes, I did. Looks like there are a lot of questions in the chat. That's great. Those are, I think, more questions than we can deal with in the time that we have. Unless there's one of those that jumps out to you, Jennifer, that I should address.
There's just another question here about tracking any information about effects on nonprofits.
I think the nonprofit sector is one that's getting more attention from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we may be able to do something with some pretty hard data on that sector. We will, I'll try and refresh my memory on exactly what that data is. I think that we have seen nonprofits hit significantly, both in terms of from the perspective of receiving donations. I think those are likely down with the uncertainty, or at least there are some donors that may be holding back a little bit with the big shock we saw to the stock market. Hopefully, there's been some offsetting donations from the rest of us in response to the need. And there's no doubt that the need for the services that are provided by Arizona and Tucson nonprofits, that the need is significantly higher than it was before the outbreak. So for those of us with the capability to donate to these kinds of worthy activities, we should certainly be thinking along those lines. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll ask Jennifer if she knows of any way to copy out the chat questions. We will have a look through those, and we'll look at those for future topics for either Map Talk webinars or for feature articles, and we will try and address them in that way. As always, feel free to email me or Jennifer anytime with your questions, and we will respond to you as quickly as we can. So with that, I will conclude this Map Talk. Thanks so much for joining, and thank you for your questions and your interaction. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.